I wasn't actually intending to film this part of the walk here at the start of Gray's Inn Road, but I just spotted that face on the building over there. I'd never noticed it before. Of course, this is on one of the banks of the River Fleet, which flows behind this building, so it's kind of got a sort of slightly mythloric feel to it, hasn't it? And I was always fascinated by this kind of chain of mansion blocks here on Gray's Inn Road when I lived in the area and I was doing some of my early researches. It turned out they were all built by the same developer. They're named after places in North Devon. There's Tiverton Mansions over there, and there's Dawlish Mansions. That's because the developer came to London to make his fortune. He was a very poor boy, and he did very well. He actually built some buildings elsewhere, and they were designed to be good quality mansion blocks for working people. And look there, the demolition of that building has revealed a ghost sign that would have been hidden. Don't tell me that's Andrew's restaurant which has been knocked down. That's a tragedy. That was one of the great kind of greasy spoons of London. Oh my God, that's cast a shadow over today's walk. London really is a city of disappearances, as in the title of the anthology that Ian Sinclair put together. I haven't even introduced the video, have I? And already I've dived in, and this is the thing that happens, isn't it? Because I didn't want to cover this bit here because we were, look, this street behind me, Northington Street, we were up there not long ago when we did a walk around Gray's Inn, didn't we? And we came up through here, Corham's Fields, all that business, Lamb's Conduit Street. So today we're going to head to, I can't believe this is one of those videos, I can't believe I haven't made it already, is we're going to go to Caledonian Park, or whatever it is they call it now. And I wrote about this in 2004, and it became one of my first blog posts actually. And for some reason I've not made a video. I wrote another article in 2015 where I updated what I'd seen in 2004. So that's the video today. We're going to walk straight up Caledonian Road, well, carry on up Gray's Inn Road, Caledonian Road to the Caledonian Park, and from there we'll busk it from there. I don't know, maybe we'll end the walk there, maybe we'll loop back down York Road. I was about to say Maiden Lane, that's what it used to be, to King's Cross, but we've got a great day ahead of us, so buckle up, it's going to be a cracking walk. Here we're looking down Elm Street into the Fleet Valley. The River Fleet is running just the other side of that building there, that sort of block of flats. I'll link below to my River Fleet walk. Love that old school newsagents is still there, it's barely changed. Not in the 20 years that I've been coming through here and taking note of it. And there we have the Calthorpe Arms. And I remember that was a place I would occasionally stop off on my walks home from work, up to the Angel. It's a decent pub, but I seem to remember it was a Young's pub, and that looks like it might not be a Young's pub anymore. Maybe I'm wrong about all of that. Oh no, it still is a Young's pub. That's I don't know why I'm relieved about that, but I am. St Andrew's Gardens. It's a really delightful little gardens. I used to go and sit in there sometimes just to bring my baby son there. I have to go in there. Let's go and have a little look in there. It's a very peaceful little spot there. So St Andrew's Gardens here, I think is well, you can see it's a former cemetery, isn't it? Due to the presence of these tombs here. I'm not sure what happened to the church, whether it was bombed or whether it was demolished. And this is one of the great Art Deco buildings of London, isn't it? Trinity Court. I always thought this was the Poirot building, but people pointed out when we did the walk around Clerkenwell that that's on Charterhouse Square. That's why I didn't include it in that video, because I thought it was here. I stand corrected, but what an amazing building this is. What a beauty. And here we have the London Welsh Centre. Strong Welsh associations with this area of London due to the proximity of the cattle markets, which is basically what we'll be talking about later on. And you had the Welsh drovers would bring their cattle down through this area, and you had Welsh dairies. Of course, such a long journey, a lot of them just ended up staying here. This is a really beautiful building. Although we're really sort of in central London here really, or right on the edge of central London, it's often really quiet at weekends and at sort of holiday periods. You can see today, look, I remember at Christmas, one Christmas, just walking up the middle of Gray's Inn Road all the way to King's Cross. There wasn't a single car. This is the Eastman Dental Clinic, which looks like it's undergoing some sort of redevelopment. Wouldn't surprise me if it's going to become housing of some description. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll look it up when we get home. Look, so we can see it's going to be a UCL Centre for Neuroscience. That's a good thing to be happening. This really is a landscape of nostalgia for me from when I lived up at the Angel. I know I talk about that a lot, but I think nostalgia is really, I think it's a really important part of our navigation of the city, because it's a material city, a hard city, you know, the city of bricks and stone. This is also a city of topography and landscape, like the river valleys, but then it's a city of memory as well, memory and emotion. And sometimes our memories are a little bit unreliable, aren't they? And I used to come down here all the time when my first son was born, actually, and when my second son was born. In fact, at one point I was coming down here pretty much every day when my second son was born. And just over the road, actually, was a very important place for us. This is a little kind of community garden called the Calthorpe project. And they used to sort of do lots of things for little kids in here, where they could introduce them to, you know, growing plants, and used to talk about insects, and they could get hands-on with things in there. It was great, and there was a little play group in that building. I used to come down here a lot. The Lucas Arms here on the corner of Cromer Street. Cromer Street's a great street. I'll try and link to the video below where I walk along Cromer Street, but that's another pub. Been in a few times. It was fairly decent, although we're getting close to King's Cross now, so it's got a little bit of that kind of transient feel to it. And there we have the Water Rats, which certainly was once a kind of fairly legendary music venue. I don't know about its status now. I have a feeling that's where Oasis played their first London gig. That could be incorrect, but I certainly remember reading a review of them doing a gig there where everyone started to get excited about Oasis. And I'm sure there's a very long list of bands that have played there that have gone on to become famous. And here's the legendary Scala, or what was once the legendary Scala. It looks like it's still a venue. What's it now? It's pool and bar and snooker. It was famous as a legendary repertory cinema that used to do sometimes all-night movie marathons. There's so many people that have got histories of that. I don't think I ever saw a film there, to be honest with you. I remember having a wall chart in the kitchen, but I don't remember ever going. Andrew Cotting used to go there, the great filmmaker Andrew Cotting. Man, largely responsible for me standing here holding a camera. He used to go there a lot. I think Danny Boyle's talked about going there. I think anyone interested in film of a certain age used to spend time at the Scala. You can see King's Cross Station just down there. But we're going to go up Caledonian Road, so we're not going to go right up to King's Cross Station. But the Scottish stores over there, that pub, that was once the Flying Scotsman. And that pub had a real reputation. I never actually went in there. I got as far as, I opened the door once and realised it wasn't the place for me, but I believe from what I've heard, all sorts of things used to go on in the Flying Scotsman. I'm sure there'll be some rather fruity anecdotes in the comments if you dare go for a look. And here we have Housmans bookshop, the radical booksellers, and also that's the home of Peace House. It's a really wonderful institution, more than a bookshop. It's an institution, it's a brilliant bookshop, and if you watch this channel and you're interested in London and you're interested in psychogeography, well, they've got a massive section of just psychogeography books in there and all sorts of old pamphlets and stuff that you won't find anywhere else. Massively recommended. I did an event there for my book, This Other London, and I will link to that below. So we're now on Caledonian Road. Caledonian Road, actually, interestingly, was a private development, but I think it was in the 1820s, to link, well, the city and King's Cross to, it says the chalk fields, I guess. Well, this would have been open pasture land when this road was built, cutting through fields, which gives it its story that we'll talk about when we get to Caledonian Park. But I always used to feel like it was a much older street than it actually is. Like I say, it's well, just slightly pre-Victorian development, but a really significant road. We'll see in a minute, you'll see the canal cuts across, and then you had the station here. It was really at the heart of the communication system in London. But just here, I'm looking down one of the real great, I don't know, I want to call it an anachronism, but one of the great survivors of the massive development around this area, Keystone Crescent. There's a great little information board here on the wall of Keystone Crescent, which is fantastic. And it talks about how the King's Cross area had a terrible reputation because of the slaughterhouse for horses that used to be transported down here, and it had a smallpox hospital. And where Pentonville prison now stands, there used to be an asylum for Scottish children that were orphaned during the Napoleonic Wars. It was known as Battle Bridge in those days. And this crescent here, this beautiful little crescent, was built when the land was developed. It says it's got the smallest radiant of any crescent in Europe. I love little facts like that. And incredibly, it was threatened with demolition when they were redeveloping King's Cross. At one point, the plans were that they were going to build the big tower blocks all the way down Caledonian Road in York Way and obliterate everything in its path. We had a friend that lived here, and they ended up moving out of London because they couldn't deal with all the chaos of development with young children. I think what's difficult for people to imagine now is just how different the communities were not even that long ago, even when in the time that I've lived around this area or been associated with this area. Sort of people that I knew that lived here were just like musicians. They weren't wealthy people. They were musicians, artists, that kind of thing. Obviously now these places change hands for an awful lot of money, but back then it's just where sort of average Londoners lived in places like this. Like I say, we lived up on a council estate up there on the Barnsbury estate, and we used to go to the play groups and stuff around here. And I'll talk more about the Calais as we go out. The Calais has a particular history, has a particular reputation. It was quite a rough place. I think a lot of the kind of like the North London gangsters were sort of associated with Caledonian Road, and some of the stories we heard from people, that grew up around here, there's some quite interesting stories of pubs where the gangsters would just put their guns on the table, and you'd walk in and these geezers would have like their revolvers sat there. I don't know how true that is or whether that was a toy revolver or not, I'm not sure. King Charles I pub. Now, a lot of people say that's the best pub in Islington, and to be honest with you, given what they've done to a lot of the pubs in Islington, it probably is now. Certainly a good pub, really good choice of ales, and they do like a folk music there. I think it's on a Monday. It's worth checking out anyway. It's a really nice little pub, that, in this little quiet back street here, North Down Street. The Thornhill Arms pub. Now, that was a proper locals pub. I went in there a couple of times. It was a real Arsenal pub then. And I remember whilst we were living in the area, someone got murdered outside there one night. I think it was like just a fight. I think it was like an unlucky one where someone got punched and fell over and died from their injury. But even so, gave you a little bit of an indicator of what it could be like. And then we can see the edge of, I think that is just the edge of Barnsbury Estate behind it, the newer bit. But we're not going to go up there today. We'll save that for another day. I say we'll cover it in another video. We kind of already have, actually. The Little Italy walk ends just the other side of Barnsbury Estate there. When we visit, we end that walk at the fantastic White Conduit House, an incredibly resonant location. And that's been a very popular video, that Little Italy video, and it's a very special walk for me, and that was where I lived, in the Barnsbury Estate. So you can watch that video there below. And actually another video that I'll link to, which you might find interesting, is one that I shot, I think I shot it around 2003, 2004, and it's basically the walk we've done so far, but down Caledonian Road, down Graysian Road as well, and some of those buildings around there, because you got a sense that it was changing and a lot of it was going to be swept away. But I'd say probably as it turned out, probably it hasn't changed quite as much in this section as we feared it would. Obviously around King's Cross, it's totally transformed. Something else you'll probably find interesting actually is a Mike Leigh film called High Hopes that covers the kind of King's Cross area there, and it shows what that was like before the development. As recently as I think that film was made in 1988, it's a late 80s film. It's a completely different world, both physically And then you kind of see the kind of communities that there were around King's Cross then. Still some of that around, but you know. And here we have the Regent's Canal, the magnificent Regent's Canal, just after it's emerged from the Islington tunnel. And here it's heading through King's Cross. This is where we used to do a lot of our morning walks. And it's a lovely walk from here up to Camden. If I wasn't making a video, that's probably what I would do right now, actually. Although that towpath is very congested these days. Slightly gruesome story, but unavoidable part of the story of the area. This is an incident that happened whilst we were living up at Barnsbury Estate. A couple of lads were fishing in the canal down here one morning, and they pulled out a very heavy suitcase. They opened the suitcase to see what was inside, to see what treasure they'd found, and actually what they found were body parts. And actually overheard the kids in my local shop up there on Barnsbury Estate. They ran in there all excited and they told this story. They said, we fished this canal, this suitcase out of the canal, and it had a leg on it. It's pretty gruesome. I remember I was in there to buy baby formula and nappies. It was really gruesome. And the unfortunate story of that was it was a sex worker from King's Cross, and they were pushed out of that area and the protective community that had developed there over many years, and they were just working the streets around here. And this guy had taken a sex worker home to do drugs together, and she'd been murdered. Her body was chopped up, put into a suitcase and thrown into the canal. That's part of the story there. It can't all be happy stories. Ethiopian calf there. I remember eating there once. The food was really nice. It used to be an internet calf as well that I used to use. I think I did some of my very early blog posts from that calf there. So here we stand. Here's the bottom of Copenhagen Street, and you'll see a few Danish references now. Well, actually, it's just really Copenhagen Street. There was the King of Denmark pub, but I think that's gone actually. But it's all to commemorate. Actually, we don't really know as to commemorate. One story is there was a Danish noble who took refuge during a plague at Copenhagen House, which was on the site of Caledonian Park, where we're going to head. I think that will be the end of our walk. That will be the good climax to this stroll along the Calais. I think that mural there on the side of this building in Copenhagen Street is all that remains of the pub that was there. Well, the building's there, but I think the pub's quite long gone. It was open when we lived in the area. It was a strange little pub. It was just like someone's front room. I remember walking in there and having a pint. There were just like two old people sat at a table, and there was only about 4 tables in there from memory. One of the things that used to kind of slightly frustrate me when I lived in the area was the reputation that Islington had as this kind of like shishi place for the kind of Chianti quaffing, what they call them, the laterati. And of course, Tony Blair did live just over there on the other side of Barnard Park. That is true. So there was that element. Margaret Hodge, I think, still lives there, and she was at that point leader of Islington Council. But then again, in the same street, I believe there were members of the Adams crime family, I believe, lived there, or in this area anyway. Actually, they came from the estate I lived in, as the health worker told us when she came to visit our newborn child. And I think they still exert, influence in the area. But it's got that kind of reputation as this posh place. That's what, a lot of the people watching this are not going to be from Islington, and you have a certain idea of like the North London media types. But actually, this is historically quite a tough area, quite a rough, tough area. And to a degree, it still kind of is. And to a large extent, the Calais was at the heart of that. I'd say the Caledonian Road and Holloway Road. Tough streets. They were really tough streets, tough areas. It's quite a long way from the North London media set that people imagine this area to be, or certainly associate it with. And there are strong Italian associations with the area as well. I guess it must be from its proximity to Little Italy. People must have moved out to here at some point. And there used to be an Italian cultural centre along Caledonian Road. I know a lot of Italians that I've met over the years in London have spent time around Caledonian Road. Tarmon pub over there. I think that's another pub I probably only ever went into maybe once or twice. It used to be open quite late, so I think I went there for a late drink once. I seem to remember it was an Irish pub. It's quite a beautiful building that though, isn't it? So we're just going to go up Richmond Avenue and into Thornhill Square, just a little diversion because it's one of my favourite little pockets in the whole of London. Did hesitate slightly there, but I think I can say that now. One of the really interesting features of Richmond Avenue is further up there. Some of the houses have little obelisks at the front and a sphinx just beside the door, which I think is a reference to the popularity of Egyptiana, is it, or Egyptomania, when these houses were built. I had some fun with that in my book, but you'll have to read that chapter to find out. And here is the wonderful Thornhill Square. This is a really beautiful little secret pocket of London. Spent many, many, many hours, happy hours with the kids in the park here. So the name of the square takes its name from the family who started this development in the 1840s. Quite lovely grand houses. One of the things that surprised me though was that when we lived in the area and we used to go to play groups around here, I discovered that actually I think about a quarter of the houses here were actually owned by the council, by Islington Council. We knew people that were council tenants here, and some of them had bought their houses under right to buy, like very cheaply in the 1980s, and even when we were here like 15 years ago or more, some of these places were worth millions of pounds, like multiple millions, so I dread to think what they're worth now. But I think part of the reason they'd ended up in the possession of the council was because this area was heavily bombed during the Second World War, and it became quite depopulated after the war. So you had a lot of areas, I think it's Thornhill Square itself as well, had suffered bomb damage. So there were still bomb sites here into the 50s and the 60s. So the council kind of had to take ownership of some of those sort of derelict properties to sort of do them up and to try and revitalise the area. It's an interesting thought now, isn't it, that these areas where the houses are worth millions of pounds, once upon a time people just kind of upped and left after the war. Just goes to show things aren't always what they seem. Some of these beautiful big houses here behind us could be council houses. This is a really wonderful building, this one. This is West Library, one of Islington Council's libraries, and this is one of my favourites. Spent an awful lot of time in there when we lived in the area. And this is one of the 5 Carnegie libraries in Islington, who were funded by the wealthy philanthropist. This pub's still here. I think it used to be called something else once upon a time. I was getting confused with another pub further up. It's an old, quite basic kind of Irish boozer. And here we have Pentonville Prison, which is actually oddly misnamed because we're not in Pentonville, we're really in Barnsbury. It should be called Barnsbury Prison in all reality. This was a new model prison when it was built. I think it's modelled on a panopticon, so that they can always see everywhere from the centre. I think that's the idea of a panopticon, isn't it? My old pal Nick Papademetro spent some time in there, and I think he was quite beguiled by the architecture. Well, I mean, I think he preferred to have not been in there, but I think it's not the nicest place to be locked up, are any of them, but I think this one's particularly unpleasant. They used to carry out executions in Pentonville. It's where the notorious Dr. Crippen was hung. He'd actually committed his murders not very far away at all in Hilldrop Crescent, N7. And pretty much dead opposite the main gate of Pentonville Prison, you have the hilariously named Breakout Cafe. The Cali here, I think that's the other pub I was thinking of, not Doyle's Bar. I think Doyle's Bar has always been Doyle's Bar. This one, well, it's Had a lick of paint since I photographed it in what year was that? 2003, 2004. And this estate here, the Caledonian estate, I did read somewhere that this was the first social housing estate in London, but people always seem to say that's Arnold's Circus, so that fact must be incorrect. But it's certainly one of the really early sort of, council housing developments in London. So we now turn off Caledonian Road into Market Road, and the real highlight, the pinnacle of today's walk. So this park here in Islington, with this majestic clock tower, was once the Metropolitan Cattle Market, which might not sound like much, but it was an incredible place. It was where they moved Smithfield in 1855 because they realised they couldn't just keep moving livestock into central London on the scale that they were, and the conditions at Smithfield were really awful. So they thought they needed to build a new modern cattle market, so they built it here on Copenhagen fields. This had been a really famous pleasure garden. There'd been a manor house here, Copenhagen House, that's documented at least in the 1620s. It probably goes back further than that. And it had become a notorious pleasure garden, a haunt for radicals. There were lots of big meetings here. The Chartists used to hold meetings here. And when there was a massive demonstration in support of the Tolpodal Martyrs here, where 100,000 people gathered on Copenhagen fields. One of the more interesting aspects of its past is on a Friday they would hold what they called a peddler's market here, where there would be hundreds if not thousands of stalls here selling all manner of stuff. H.V. Morton writes about it in the 1920s visiting here, and he's offered a human skeleton for sale, I think for like 10 shillings. A friend of his had bought a mummy here. I'm sure it can't have been a real mummy. Walter Sicker lived nearby, and he loved it here. I think he called it was his idea of heaven. Well, I think Sicker was quite a dark character in some ways, wasn't he? There was a famous racing tipster who used to operate here called Raz Prince Monolulu, who would dish out racing tips, and apparently he was fantastically good. There was a fellow called Jack Cohen who had a stall here, a food stall, that went on to become Tesco's. He named it after his wife, Tessa Cohen, Tesco. And that started life here. Those bells up there would toll out at 10 o'clock on the Friday peddlers market. At that point the gates would open and the traders would rush in to get the best spot. So this is one of the 4 gin palaces that was built on the corners of the old Metropolitan Cattle Market to service the various traders and people that worked around the market here. Apparently each one of the taverns, the gin palaces, catered to a different set of clientele, because there was all very different types of tribes here, and they could be fairly lively places. Part of the old market infrastructure here, some of the old gate posts. Wonderful bit of Victorian wrought iron. All that remains today is that clock tower there. Behind the clock tower you can see there's an estate, the market estate. And when I first visited here, I think it was in 2004, it had become really run down and become quite notorious. There was sort of exposed wires everywhere. There were bits of the building hanging off. There was a tragic incident where a young boy was killed by a falling door, a heavily reinforced falling door. And I think there's a street in the new development named after him. Christopher Pullen was his name. They demolished that estate and they rebuilt the new development there, but they've kept the power of the clock tower as its central focus. And you can see it from the high ground all around. This, of course, is the landscape that Blake imagined the pillars of gold stood here on the plains beneath Islington, between here and Marylebone, with the River Fleet flowing through. This plain is where the pillars of gold of New Jerusalem would rise. I'll put the actual quote on the screen. I've remembered that quite poorly there. But such is the power of this location. It scrambles your mind, makes you misremember things. But this part here, this clock tower, I think is one of the most sort of extraordinary monuments in London. And how it's not more famous, I have no idea. I'm swinging the camera around here I'm trying to frame it so I can get the clock tower behind my head, but I don't know if that's good. I will block out the clock tower, otherwise I'll be doing this the whole time. I just want to say thank you for joining me on that, for me, an incredibly powerfully nostalgic walk back here up the Calais, Gray's Inn Road, Calais, past the old Barnsbury estate, to here, to Caledonian Park on Copenhagen fields. This is a video I've been wanting to make since I came here, when it would have been much more difficult and before YouTube existed. So yeah, a bit of a special one for me. I hope I've done it justice, but whatever, it'll be what it'll be. I hope you're all doing well, take care, and as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be.